I believed my son was traveling the world for work until a stranger at the farmer's market called my name and handed me a package that should not have existed. Saturday mornings had been the only part of my life that still felt predictable. I would wake before sunrise, pull on my old jacket, and drive the short road into town where the farmer's market unfolded beside the river. I sold homemade preserves, honey from my backyard hives, and apples from the trees my wife and I planted decades ago. People knew me there. They called me by name. They asked about my son the same way they always had. With polite curiosity and gentle envy, I always gave them the same answer. He was overseas for work again. International projects. Big opportunities. I said it so often that it began to sound true even to me. That morning felt no different at first. The air was cool, the sky low and gray, the smell of coffee drifting from the corner stall. I arranged my jars in neat rows, wiping the glass with a cloth, rehearsing the familiar smiles. Somewhere in the back of my mind was the ache I carried every day since my wife passed, the quiet loneliness that made routines feel like lifelines. My son was all I had left of the life we built together. Believing he was safe and successful somewhere far away helped me sleep at night. It was almost 9 when I noticed the man standing across the aisle. He was out of place, not browsing, not chatting, just watching me. He wore a delivery jacket, one I did not recognize, and his eyes kept darting around as if he expected someone to stop him. I assumed he was lost. People often were. I turned back to my table, but when I looked up again, he was closer. He said my name quietly, not as a question, but as a confirmation. I felt my chest tighten. I had not told him who I was. He reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a small brown package, sealed carefully, my son's name written across the front in block letters. Seeing that name, so familiar and suddenly so heavy, made my hands tremble before I even touched it. He did not smile. He did not introduce himself. He leaned in just enough that only I could hear him. "Please watch it alone," he said. "Do not tell anyone you got this from me." I asked him where it came from. He shook his head. I asked him how he knew my name. He looked past me toward the crowd as if someone might be listening. "I should not be here," he said, but I could not pretend I did not see him. Before I could ask who he meant, he pressed the package into my hands. His fingers were cold. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of people as if he had never existed at all. For a long moment, I stood there holding that package while the market moved around me. A woman asked the price of honey. A child laughed somewhere behind me. Music drifted from a street performer. Life continued as if nothing had changed, but everything had. I told myself there was a simple explanation, a mistake, a delayed shipment, something my daughter-in-law had arranged without mentioning it. She was organized like that, always managing details, always a step ahead. She had been the one to handle my son's travel, his accounts, his paperwork, ever since he took on those overseas contracts. I trusted her. I had no reason not to. Or, at least, that was what I had told myself for 3 years. I finished the market on autopilot. I packed up early, ignored the questions, drove home with the package sitting on the passenger seat like a living thing. Every red light felt longer than the last. Every turn brought a new wave of unease. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were numb from gripping the wheel too tightly. Inside the house, the silence felt louder than usual. I placed the package on the kitchen table where my wife used to sort mail. The sunlight through the window caught the edge of the tape, making it glint. I did not open it. I could not yet. Instead, I sat down across from it and stared, listening to my own breathing, to the ticking clock, to the voice in my head that kept repeating the same thought over and over. If my son was truly overseas, then why did this package exist at all? That was the moment, though I did not fully understand it yet, when the story I had been protecting for years began to collapse. I did not open the package right away because opening it meant admitting that something was wrong. And for years I had built my days on the belief that nothing was. I made coffee the way I always did, slowly, deliberately, as if routine could anchor me. I told myself that my hands were shaking because of the cold morning, not because of fear. The package stayed on the table between the salt and pepper shakers, my son's name facing upward like it was watching me. I sat across from it, replaying every conversation I had ever had about him, every time I had defended the story without hesitation. My son, I told people, worked in international logistics, or consulting, or infrastructure planning. The exact title changed depending on who was asking, but the core of the story never did. He traveled constantly. Time zones were difficult. Calls were irregular. Messages were brief. Everyone accepted that explanation. It sounded impressive enough to discourage further questions. It sounded reasonable enough to comfort an aging father. My daughter-in-law had been the one to shape that narrative. She was always composed, always patient when I asked about him. "He is busy," she would say. "You know how demanding his projects are." She spoke with quiet authority, the kind that made you feel foolish for doubting her. She sent photos occasionally. Airports, hotel rooms, city skylines taken from above. Never my son in the frame. Always just enough to suggest movement and importance. When weeks passed without his voice, I blamed myself for expecting too much. When holidays came and went with only short messages, I reminded myself that ambition required sacrifice. After my wife died, that belief hardened into something else entirely. Losing her had left a hollow space inside me, and into that space I poured every comforting lie I could find. At least my son was building something. At least he was safe. At least one part of my life was moving forward. The tape on the package peeled back with a soft sound that felt far too loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside was a plain envelope, a USB drive, and a photograph. I picked up the photograph first. My son stared back at me, thinner than I remembered, his face pale under harsh lighting. He was holding a folded newspaper, the date clearly visible in the corner. It was from 6 months earlier. The background was not an airport or a hotel. It was a white room with no windows, a metal chair, a camera mounted high on the wall. My breath caught in my throat. This was not travel. This was not work. This was confinement. I pressed the photo flat against the table as if it might curl up and disappear if I let go. My mind raced through explanations, excuses, anything that could make this image fit the story I had protected so fiercely. Maybe he had been sick. Maybe it was a temporary facility. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. The envelope contained a short, handwritten letter. The writing was uneven, hurried. "I saw him," it read. "He is not where they say he is. I did not know who else to give this to." There was no signature. I sat back in my chair and felt something shift inside me, something heavy and irreversible. Every memory of the last 3 years replayed itself through a different lens. The rehearsed phone calls, the way my daughter-in-law always answered for him, the way she discouraged surprise visits, the way she handled his finances, his mail, his legal documents, insisting it was easier that way. I thought about the times neighbors asked why my son never visited, why he never sent gifts, why he never showed his face. I remembered how quickly I defended him, how sharply I shut down doubt. I had not just believed the lie, I had protected it. I had helped build the walls around it, brick by brick, because believing it was easier than facing the alternative. The USB drive sat untouched beside the photograph. I knew it held answers. But I also knew that once I watched what was on it, there would be no going back. Ignorance, I realized, had been a choice, and it was one I could no longer afford. As the afternoon light shifted across the kitchen floor, I understood something with painful clarity. If my son had been trapped all this time, then the greatest betrayal was not just what had been done to him. It was how willingly I had looked away. I reached for the USB drive, my hand steady now in a way it had not been all morning. Whatever was on it, I was ready to see the truth I had been avoiding. I waited until nightfall to plug the USB drive into my laptop, as if darkness might soften whatever it was about to show me. The house felt different once the sun went down. Every sound carried farther: the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock above the sink. I closed the curtains, not because I expected anyone to see, but because instinct told me this was not something meant for daylight. When the screen lit up, my reflection stared back at me for a moment, older than I remembered, eyes rimmed with fear and resolve. There were dozens of files, neatly labeled by date. I clicked the first video. The footage was grainy, taken from a high corner of a room I recognized instantly. My living room. The angle caught the front door, the hallway, the cabinet where I kept paperwork. The timestamp showed a day I had been away visiting my sister. I watched myself leave the house that morning, unaware I was being recorded. Then, the door opened again hours later. My daughter-in-law stepped inside. She moved with confidence, not hesitation. She did not call out or look around like someone checking if the house was empty. She went straight to the cabinet, pulled out folders, spread them across the table. I watched her photograph documents with her phone: deeds, bank statements, insurance papers. She knew exactly what she was looking for. I felt my stomach tighten as the next video played. Different day, same routine. She entered, searched, left, over and over again. Sometimes she wore gloves. Sometimes she did not. She never stayed longer than 15 minutes. Efficiency, not emotion, guided her movements. This was not concern for family. This was preparation. I paused the video and leaned back, my chest burning. I had given her a key years ago, back when trust felt natural and permanent. I had told myself it was practical. Now I understood what she had really been doing with that access. Another folder contained scanned documents, medical evaluations, legal filings, guardianship paperwork. My son's name appeared again and again, paired with phrases that made my vision blur: impaired judgment, reduced capacity, recommended supervision. The signature at the bottom of every page belonged to my daughter-in-law. I read the words slowly, forcing myself to understand them. She had petitioned the court for emergency guardianship after what she described as an accident: a fall, a head injury, temporary confusion. She presented herself as the devoted spouse stepping in to protect her husband. The court had granted her authority with alarming speed. Authority over his finances, his medical care, his freedom. I felt a wave of nausea as I scrolled further. Restricted visitation. Communication limited for recovery. All contact coordinated through guardian. I realized then why I had not spoken to my son directly in so long. Why every message came filtered. Why every call was cut short. It had not been distance or time zones that separated us. It had been permission. The final video in the folder was different. It showed my son sitting in a stark room, hands folded in his lap. He looked thinner, older somehow. His shoulders slumped but his eyes alert. A nurse stood just outside the frame. The camera was too far away to catch his voice clearly, but I watched his face as someone off-screen spoke to him. He nodded. Then he shook his head. At one point, his eyes lifted, not to the nurse, not to the camera, but upward, toward the corner where the lens was mounted. For a brief second, his gaze held steady, focused, unmistakably aware. He knew he was being watched. I shut the laptop and pressed my hands against my face, trying to breathe. The truth pressed down on me with crushing weight. My son had not disappeared into a successful life abroad. He had been hidden, controlled, erased, all while I reassured myself with stories that required no action from me. I thought of the delivery driver, of the fear in his eyes. The letter suddenly made sense. He must have seen my son during a drop-off, a transport, a moment that broke through whatever story he had been told. Guilt had driven him to me, the only person whose name still meant something real to my son. Anger rose slowly, deliberately, replacing shock. This was not an impulsive act. It was a plan, one that required time, access, and my cooperation through silence. And I had given all three without realizing it. I understood then that reacting openly would only make things worse. Whoever orchestrated this believed they were untouchable. Panic would alert them. Accusations would be deflected. I needed to be something they did not expect. Calm. I reopened the laptop and copied every file onto an external drive. I wrote down dates, names, locations. I backed everything up twice. When I finally shut the screen, my reflection stared back again. But this time, there was something new in my expression. Clarity. If they thought I was a confused old man clinging to a comforting lie, then that was the role I would continue to play. For now, because the truth I had just uncovered was not something to confront recklessly, it was something to use carefully. And for the first time since that stranger handed me the package, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I thought the worst realization would be learning what had been done to my son, but I was wrong. The worst truth was understanding that my wife had seen this coming, and I had not listened closely enough while she was still alive. 2 days after watching the videos, I drove to the bank downtown, the same one my wife and I had used for more than 30 years. I told the teller I needed access to an old safety deposit box. She frowned at the screen and asked if I was sure. The box had not been opened since before my wife passed away. Hearing that made my chest tighten. I nodded anyway. The vault smelled like metal and dust and time. When the box was placed in front of me, my hands hovered over it for a moment before opening the lid. Inside were neatly stacked documents, a sealed envelope with my name written in my wife's handwriting, and a small leather notebook I recognized instantly. She used to carry it everywhere. I opened the letter first. "If you are reading this, it means you finally had to look where I hoped you would never need to," she wrote. "I am sorry for that, but I could not leave this world without trying to protect what matters most." My vision blurred as I read. She explained how, years earlier, she had begun to notice things that did not sit right. How our daughter-in-law asked too many questions about finances. How she volunteered to manage paperwork no one had asked her to handle. How she listened more than she spoke and remembered everything. "I tried to talk to you," my wife wrote, "but you always said she was just being helpful. You said I was worrying too much. Maybe I was. Or maybe love made you look away." Each sentence felt like a quiet accusation, not spoken in anger, but in regret. Beneath the letter was a thick folder labeled with my son's name. Inside were trust documents I had never seen. My wife had created them quietly, with a lawyer she trusted, long before her illness worsened. The trust placed my son's inheritance and any future assets beyond the reach of a spouse under certain conditions, conditions that now made terrifying sense. She had anticipated manipulation. She had prepared for it. The notebook contained her personal thoughts, dates, observations, small moments I had dismissed at the time. A conversation where our daughter-in-law corrected my son mid-sentence. A holiday visit where she insisted on leaving early because he was tired. A time when she answered his phone and said he could not talk. Reading it felt like watching a slow storm form on the horizon while insisting the sky was still clear. At the back of the notebook was a name and a phone number, an attorney. Next to it, my wife had written, "If anything ever feels wrong, start here." I sat alone in the vault longer than I should have, the weight of my failure pressing down on me. I had loved my wife deeply. I trusted her judgment in everything that mattered. And yet, when it came to this, I had chosen comfort over caution. I had chosen peace over vigilance, and my son had paid the price. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright. I sat in my truck with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel, while memories flooded in. My wife asking gentle questions, my dismissive answers, my insistence that everything was fine. I dialed the number from the notebook. The attorney answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, measured, familiar in a way that suggested long experience with bad news. When I explained who I was, he went quiet for a moment. "Your wife asked me to be ready for this call," he said. "I hoped it would never come." We spoke for nearly an hour. He confirmed what I already suspected. What I had uncovered pointed to coordinated guardianship abuse, not a misunderstanding, not a family dispute. A calculated move designed to isolate my son and gain control over assets. He warned me to move carefully. These cases, he said, often escalated when challenged, especially when large sums of money were involved. When I hung up, I felt something solid settle inside me. Grief was still there, guilt too, but beneath them was purpose. That night, I laid everything out on the dining table. The trust documents, the videos, the letter, pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. My wife had not been paranoid. She had been perceptive. She had tried to hand me the truth gently. I had refused it. I could not undo that, but I could honor it. As I packed the documents into a folder, I made a silent promise to her. I would finish what she started. I would stop pretending this was just a family problem that could be solved with patience and silence. This was a fight she had prepared for long before I was brave enough to see it. And now it was my turn to step into it. The attorney did not mince words. If what I had found was accurate, then waiting or confronting my daughter-in-law directly would be the worst possible mistake. People who build systems of control, he told me, do not panic when questioned. They panic when exposed, and panic made them dangerous. Within a week, I had done something I never imagined doing in my 70s. I hired a private investigator. He was a quiet man with tired eyes and a voice that carried no curiosity, only attention. He did not ask why I waited so long. He did not question my motives. He listened. He watched the videos. He read the paperwork. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed what my instincts had already begun to accept. "This is not an isolated case," he said. "This looks like a pattern." He explained that certain facilities specialized in what he called convenient incapacitation. Patients were labeled unstable, communication was restricted, families were managed, and assets quietly shifted under the protection of legal paperwork few people understood until it was too late. The same names appeared again and again, the same attorneys, the same doctors willing to sign off without meaningful evaluation. As he spoke, I realized how small my personal story really was. My son was not just a victim of betrayal. He was a cog in a system designed to profit from silence. The investigator began digging immediately. Within days, he found 2 other families connected to the same facility. One elderly woman whose sister had vanished after a stroke. One man whose business partner had been declared unfit weeks before a lucrative sale. Both families had been told the same things I had been told. Recovery takes time. Limited contact is best. Trust us. One of those families had tried to fight back. The file showed that a journalist had begun asking questions about the facility nearly a year earlier. Financial connections, sudden guardianships, unusual mortality rates. The investigation ended abruptly after what was officially ruled an accident. No charges, no follow-up. When the investigators slid that report across the table, I felt a chill settle deep in my bones. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. Take care of your health. No threat, no explanation, just a suggestion wrapped in concern. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Fear rose slowly, not sharp enough to paralyze me, but heavy enough to demand respect. The next morning, my daughter-in-law showed up at my house unannounced. She looked worried, attentive, exactly the way she always had when playing the role she needed me to believe. She brought groceries. She commented on how tired I looked. She asked if I had been sleeping well. Then she mentioned paperwork. She said there were some documents she needed me to sign, routine things, estate planning, medical contingencies. She spoke gently, patiently, as if guiding a confused child. I listened. I nodded. I told her I would look at them later. Her smile tightened, just slightly. She left an hour later, but not before reminding me that stress was not good for someone my age, that doctors worried about men who lived alone, that accidents happen more easily than people like to admit. After she left, I locked the door and sat down, my heart pounding. 2 days later, the court notice arrived. A petition had been filed, requesting a formal evaluation of my mental competency. The reason cited was concern for my well-being and ability to manage my affairs. The petitioner was my daughter-in-law. I read the document twice before the words fully settled in. This was not defensive. This was preemptive. She was not reacting to anything I had done openly. She was eliminating risk. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks until a judge would decide whether I was capable of speaking for myself. 3 weeks until my voice could be reduced to a medical opinion signed by someone I had never met. 3 weeks until the same system that had swallowed my son could close around me as well. I called the attorney immediately. He was not surprised. "This is how they maintain control," he said. "They isolate, then they discredit. Once your credibility is gone, evidence does not matter." That night, sleep did not come easily. Every sound outside my house felt amplified. Every passing car slowed my breathing. I began to understand how quickly freedom could feel fragile when someone else decided you were no longer fit to protect it. But beneath the fear, something else grew. Resolve. If they believed I was a confused old man drifting toward irrelevance, then I would let them keep believing it. I would attend appointments. I would accept concern. I would say very little and observe everything. Because now I understood the rules of the game they were playing. And I was done being the easy piece they moved first. The call came just after midnight from a number I did not recognize, and something in me knew before I answered that this was not a mistake. She spoke quickly, quietly, as if every second mattered. She said she worked inside the facility where my son was being held. She said she should not be calling me. She said she had seen my name in a file and recognized it from the news notice about the upcoming hearing. When I asked how she got my number, she paused. "Your wife left more than one trail," she said. "I followed one of them." Her voice shook, but her words were precise. She told me she was a nurse, Not new enough to be naive, not old enough to be protected. She had watched patients arrive alert and frightened and slowly disappear behind medication schedules that did not match their diagnoses. She had watched families redirected, calls limited, visits postponed. She had learned which questions not to ask. "Your son is not impaired," she said. "He never was." I closed my eyes and listened as she described him, how he corrected staff politely when they spoke about him as if he were not there, how he asked for updates about his children, how he tracked time by changes in the light because clocks were not allowed in his room. She told me there were two sets of records, one official, one real. The real ones showed no cognitive decline, no neurological damage, no justification for guardianship. The official ones told a different story, carefully constructed, repeatedly copied. I asked her why she was risking everything to tell me this. "Because I saw him look at the camera once," she said, "the way people do when they want someone out there to know they are still themselves. And because I saw what they did to the last man who tried to fight it." The next morning, she met my investigator in a parking lot miles away from the facility. She handed over copies of medical charts, medication logs, internal emails, proof of billing fraud, proof of isolation tactics, proof that my son had been kept compliant, not treated. One video made my hands shake when I watched it. It showed my son seated in a common room, a tray of food untouched in front of him. A staff member asked him a series of questions, not to assess his understanding, but to provoke confusion. When he answered clearly, the questions changed. When he hesitated, notes were made. The test was not about truth, it was about creating it. The nurse arranged something else as well, something that felt both cruel and necessary. A supervised video call. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, my son, older than I remembered, thinner, his hair cropped short. He did not smile. He did not wave. But his eyes locked onto mine with a focus that cut through every lie I had been told. We spoke in careful fragments, knowing we were being monitored. He asked about the weather, about the house, about his children. I answered the same way, keeping my voice steady. Then he said something simple. "Did you water the oak tree?" My breath caught. That tree had been planted the day his first child was born. No one outside our family knew what it meant. I answered yes. He nodded once. Just once. Enough. The call ended abruptly. The nurse did not say goodbye. That afternoon, the investigator called me with news that turned my blood cold. The delivery driver who had given me the package had been found dead. The official report cited a single vehicle accident. No witnesses. No further investigation planned. I sat in silence for a long time after the call ended. Guilt pressed against my chest like a weight. That man had risked his life to deliver the truth to me. Now he was gone. Fear came next, sharp and undeniable. Whoever was behind this was not bluffing. They were willing to erase obstacles quietly and efficiently. The nurse went silent after that. No more calls, no more messages. But what she had given us was enough, more than enough. We prepared carefully. The attorney filed motions. The investigator organized evidence. Independent experts reviewed the records. Every step was deliberate, documented, controlled. There was no room for error. At night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and thought about how close I had come to losing everything without ever realizing I was under attack. My son, my voice, my autonomy. All of it could have been signed away with the right signatures and the right silence. The hearing was less than a week away now. They believed they had already won. They believed the system would protect them, as it always had. What they did not understand was that systems collapse when someone inside them decides to speak. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself a quiet thought. We might actually bring him home. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in tone, as if warmth itself had been filtered out to keep emotion from interfering with procedure. I arrived early, dressed carefully, leaning slightly on my cane the way my daughter-in-law expected me to. She was already there when I entered, seated confidently beside her attorney, her posture calm, almost tender. When she saw me, she stood and walked over, touching my arm lightly, as if for my benefit and the judge's. "You look tired," she said softly. "We are only doing this because we care." I nodded and thanked her. The words tasted bitter, but I swallowed them without expression. This was not the day for truth spoken too soon. The judge entered. Formalities followed. The petition was read aloud, outlining concerns about my mental capacity, my ability to manage finances, my alleged confusion and paranoia. I listened as my life was summarized in a handful of phrases that reduced decades of independence to a clinical inconvenience. Then her attorney spoke. He painted a careful picture: an aging widower struggling with grief, a father consumed by delusions, a man manipulated by strangers and conspiracy theories. He spoke gently, respectfully, as if he were doing me a favor by explaining why I could no longer be trusted to speak for myself. My daughter-in-law dabbed at her eyes. Not once did she look at me. When it was my turn, my attorney stood. He did not argue. He did not accuse. He asked questions. He asked why my son had not spoken directly to me in 3 years. He asked why access to medical records had been restricted. He asked why security footage existed inside my home and who had authorized it. With each question, the atmosphere shifted slightly, like a room realizing it had misjudged its guest. Then the videos played. My living room filled the courtroom screen. Silence followed as my daughter-in-law was shown entering my home repeatedly, searching files, photographing documents. There was no commentary, no interpretation, just facts unfolding frame by frame. Her attorney objected. The judge overruled. Next came the documents. 2 sets of medical records placed side by side, one describing severe impairment, one showing normal cognitive function. The handwriting differed. The signatures overlapped in ways that made coincidence impossible. The judge leaned forward. Then my attorney requested an independent evaluation of my son to be conducted immediately, citing credible evidence of guardianship abuse. The request landed in the room like a dropped plate. My daughter-in-law finally looked at me then. Her eyes were no longer soft. The judge granted the request. 2 hours later, they brought my son into the courtroom. He walked slowly, escorted, thinner than I remembered, but upright. When he saw me, his eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something like relief. He sat, folded his hands, and waited. The psychiatrist questioned him gently at first. Simple things: dates, names, current events. My son answered clearly, calmly, without hesitation. As the questions deepened, his clarity did not waver. When asked about the accident that led to guardianship, my son paused. "There was no accident," he said. "I was pushed. I was told afterward that forgetting that was part of my recovery." The room went still. He spoke about medication used to sedate rather than treat, about isolation framed as therapy, about being told repeatedly that his father did not want to see him, that it would upset him too much. I felt my throat tighten, but I did not look away. Then my attorney played the final piece of evidence. A recording. It was my daughter-in-law's voice, taken from a conversation she believed was private. She spoke about timing, about securing assets before questions arose, about how quickly a guardianship could be arranged if the right language was used. The judge closed her eyes as the recording ended. "That will be sufficient," she said. She terminated the guardianship immediately, ordered my son released to my care pending further review, referred the case for criminal investigation, requested federal oversight due to the scope of the evidence presented. The gavel struck once. No one spoke. As deputies approached my daughter-in-law, she did not resist. She did not cry. She stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between disbelief and fury, as if she could not comprehend how the story had slipped out of her control. My son stood slowly. I stood with him. We did not embrace. Not yet. There were too many eyes, too much damage still settling. As we walked out of the courtroom together, I understood something with absolute certainty. The lie had not just been exposed, it had been forced to speak. And once spoken, it could never be buried again. The weeks after the hearing moved slowly, as if time itself needed space to adjust to the truth. My son came home with a single duffel bag and a silence that spoke louder than words. He slept in short stretches. He startled at small sounds. Some nights he sat at the kitchen table long after I had gone to bed, staring at nothing, relearning what it meant to exist without permission. We did not push him. We let the house teach him safety again. Familiar creaks, morning light through old windows, the oak tree still standing, exactly where it had always been. The investigations moved faster than I expected. Once the first thread was pulled, the rest unraveled quickly. The facility was shut down within a month, licenses revoked, records seized. Names I had never heard before appeared in headlines. Other families came forward, some furious, some broken, all carrying versions of the same story, loved ones labeled incapable. Assets quietly transferred, questions delayed until there was nothing left to recover but grief. My daughter-in-law was charged with multiple offenses: fraud, coercive control, abuse of guardianship authority. Watching her image on the evening news felt surreal, as if I were seeing a stranger rather than the woman who once sat at my table and asked me to pass the salt. I felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness for how much damage one person could do when protected by paperwork and politeness. The nurse who had spoken up eventually resurfaced through her attorney. She entered witness protection for a time. Her courage saved more lives than she will ever fully know. The delivery driver did not live to see justice, and that knowledge still wakes me some nights. Truth has a cost, and sometimes it is paid by people who never asked to be heroes. Healing was not a single moment. It was a process. Therapy, appointments, long walks, quiet conversations that ended without conclusions. My son apologized once, softly, for not fighting harder. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. Survival is not weakness. Endurance is not consent. As the months passed, he began to laugh again, carefully at first, as if testing whether the sound was allowed. His children returned to the house on weekends. They played under the oak tree, unaware of how close it had come to becoming just another memory. I thought often about my wife, about how she had seen the danger before it had a name, about how she prepared without drama, without confrontation, trusting that one day I would be forced to understand. Loving someone, I realized, sometimes means acting before they are ready to listen. I also thought about myself, about how easily I had accepted a comfortable story, how often I had chosen silence because it felt polite, how quickly I had dismissed unease as imagination. I had believed that avoiding conflict was the same as preserving peace. I know better now. Looking back, I understand that this story is not really about betrayal. It is about permission, about how systems built to protect can be used to imprison when no one is watching closely enough. About how age, trust, and love can be turned into vulnerabilities if we are not willing to ask uncomfortable questions. If there is one thing I wish someone had told me years ago, it is this: the absence of noise does not mean the absence of harm. From everything that happened, 5 lessons remain with me, clear and unmovable. First, trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Doubt is not disloyalty. It is awareness asking to be heard. Second, power rarely looks like cruelty at the beginning. It often looks like concern, organization, and helpful smiles. Third, silence protects abusers far more effectively than it protects families. Speaking up may feel disruptive, but silence is far more destructive. Fourth, courage does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as an inconvenient question, a refusal to sign, or the decision to look one more time. Fifth, truth rarely arrives gently, but it always demands action once it appears. What you do after you know matters more than how long it took you to learn. I am not proud of how late I arrived at the truth, but I am proud that I did not turn away once I saw it. My son is home. Other families were freed. A system that relied on secrecy lost its silence. That is what truth saved. If you stayed with this story until the end, I invite you to reflect for a moment. What lesson did you take from it? Which part stayed with you the longest? Tell me in the comments what you learned from this story and the city you were watching from. If this story moved you, like it, share it, and leave a comment so these truths can reach others who might still be waiting for permission to ask the right question.